And I feel like where we come from in our nature and up that generational line, that's the work. Having boundary to the part that is dysfunctional and wounded and scared and believes in isolation, and welcome the parts that do belong, that do have that wisdom, that do have the remembering of tribe and connection and co-regulation, and that the power is in connection and leading with vulnerability. Our ancestors have that. Regardless of the hurt and the harm that's happened, that lives there.
Welcome to the Relationship Psychologist podcast.
Tune in every Thursday to learn with us as we interview experts.
And laugh with us as we banter about friendship.
And take action by implementing the tools and advice we provide to you each week to level up your personal relationships.
I'm Dayna Mullen.
And I'm Alicia Hinger.
We are soul sisters, besties, and psychologists on a mission to change the culture of relationships.
Your journey to becoming more supported and connected starts
right now. Both have intensity to you too. So Alicia, I sat beside Mike at dinner the first night that I think we kind of met. And he was asking me like my human design, and he's like, I could peg you. And I was like, oh, this is intense. This is not the normal conversations you have with people when you first meet them and you sit beside them. You're like, okay, peg me. Like usually that's us. I feel like Alicia and I being psychologists, we're like, oh, we'll figure people out. But to have it back from a male figure also was like, this is really cool.
Did he peg you? Now I want to know what he peg you as. What's the peg?
Well, he pegged me right. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. A manifesting generator.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Which I had just done my human design. So like about maybe a month before. So I remember it. I was like trying to find it, but yeah, he was bang on. But I think your wife is similar too, right? You said?
Yeah, it's so palpable. There's such a quality there. I'm like, oh, yeah, there's Courtney. There's some flavors of Courtney in there. I bet she's Manny Gen. Feel like, and just feeling your energy. I'm like, oh, this woman does a lot of things at one time and can actually do that.
Yeah. I want to know what that is now. What's the Manny Gen? You have to tell me details.
Oh yeah, God, that could be a whole episode going into human design. You know, human design?
Oh, not at all.
Oh my God. It's so much fun. It's based off of astrology. So you just put in your birth time, birth location, and then it gives you a chart. And then based off of that chart, it kind of gives you an orientation of, how I describe it. It's a bit of a soul map. It helps bring in a deeper understanding of, oh, yeah, that is true about me. It talks about kind of your nature. If you're in alignment, talks about your nature. If you're out of alignment. So mine's like, if I'm in satisfaction, sweet. Like keep doing whatever I'm doing. If I'm feeling satisfied, if I feel frustrated, then I get to be like, oh, I'm out of alignment. Is it what I'm thinking about? Is it what I'm doing? Is it the relationship that I'm in right now? And then it's like, oh, yeah. And it's just like a really helpful tool to orient, to come back to the center, come back to seat, and bring more of the gifts online instead of playing out the unconscious, shadowy part of self.
Interesting. And so you need your time of your birth and your place.
Yeah. So birth time, birth day, and then location and your name. Name's less important, but it's where you entered into the world with where everything was aligned.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. A guy named Ra channeled human design, and then we could go. And then the gene keys is another modality that I love that we chatted a little bit about. And that was channeled by a guy named Richard Rudd. And so he journeyed human design for 20 years in the I Ching. Do you know what the I Ching is?
Oh.
It's like in Chinese culture for thousands of years, it was a way that they would use, it was a way that they made sense of themselves based off of when they entered the planet, just astrologically. It's just I described it as it's just a soul map. It's just oh, the way that I describe the gene keys of how it makes sense to me and my clients is okay, you know what you got from mom and dad growing up, and there's all those places where you're hurt, where you didn't feel seen, heard, or understood. The gene keys are your perfectly healthy, embodied mom and dad that are going to accurately mirror back to you, what you're here to do, your purpose, your shadows, your gifts, all of it. But it's you just get the consistent reliability of yeah, that is me. That's how I experience the gene keys.
Like a detailed source, like it's source, but it's detailed specific to your person, your soul.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it goes, God, we could go so deep on it, but maybe we jam on this another time where I can actually lay it out and we can talk about it and show you the chart. But it's like, yeah, it goes through like your life's work, what you're here to really kind of chew on, what your brand will be once you reach those higher states of frequency in yourself by chewing through all of like the trauma and all of that juicy stuff. And then it shows like your evolution, how you're here to evolve, how you radiate out into the world, your purpose. And then it goes into all the juicy bits of what's called the Venus sequence, which is your whole relational aspect of self. And then it goes into what's called the Pearl sequence, which is once you've realized through that relational space, just you and your gifting and what you do to the world, who you attract when you're doing that. And then, from that place, it's like the ultimate prosperity, the abundance, the internal freedom. That's kind of the nature of it, oversimplified.
So if someone wants to do that, if I want to do that, how do you start that process?
genekeys.com, put in your details, you get a chart, and then you message, hey, Mike, help. and then I'll send you, and then I'll send you, and then I'll send you a video of one of my mentors. His name's Peter Tung, and he has a 20-minute video that breaks down like, oh, this is like how to read the chart, which I find is the simplest way I've ever heard it described. And then he describes like, here's your generational core wound. This is when you were in like conception in the womb. And then it goes like 0 to 7. This is what you like started to embody from 7 to 14. This is what you embodied from 14 to 21. And then it goes into like you just reading like, and it's such a trip because when you look at it, you're like, holy shit.
How does it know?
That's why I chose the parents I chose. Like, that's why I chose this. Like, this is in my map. Like, this is what I'm here to learn about. This is what I'm here to digest and work through. And like, whoa, if I like if I work myself out of this generational wound in the shadow of it, holy shit, that's the greatest gift to this planet. Because your vocation, your generational wound is actually, once it's worked through, is your greatest gift to humanity and service to other.
Huh. So is yours
Yeah.
helping others? That's your gift?
My core wound is weakness, and
Okay.
the gift of it is equality. And like it gives me chills because Dayna, you're super attuned, is that balance of the masculine but also feminine, and like how we're both living there. It's the city of tenderness.
Nice.
Wow. Oh,
So like my
Alicia and I are going to,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, Alicia and I are going to dive into this like crazy. Like, I know we're going to be like, okay, we're
Yeah.
right after this, we're going to be like Googling this and messaging all night. So
Yes.
thank you, Mike, but keep,
Yeah, totally. I actually just had another psychotherapist on my podcast and same thing. We went into this and she's like, oh my God, this just opened up my whole world. I'm like, yes, thank you. It excites me because I'm like, yay, I have more soul family to connect with on this. Because when I look at the life that I live now, I'm like, none of it would have been possible without journeying with this ally of the Gene Keys and so many more things. But it's been a pretty strong foundational piece to help me understand myself.
Interesting.
oh, I love that. I heard of Gene Keys a couple years ago when I did Reiki training. They did my Reiki master did a retreat with it, but I had no idea what it was. It sounded ancient. I was like, Gene Keys, what is that?
Yeah.
But I guess I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. So I know we're going to open up into this. And yeah, like what you were saying, Mike, it's interesting when you meet somebody. I would say Alicia and I were the same way when we met. There was like a soul connection, like instantly. It was like, oh my gosh, you're my person. You're one of my people. Like it felt like that. And meeting you and a few of the others at that event was the same way. It was like, oh wow, these are more of the people. Like these are my people. So just a beautiful balance.
Oh, that's my favorite space to be. So thanks for like inviting me into closer proximity and following that intuitive hit, because this is what I live for, is the connections where, whoa, wait, relationship of reciprocity. I get to be my weird self and like learn to and like welcome that other person, and we can go deep. Like, yes, let's go deeper. Let's go deeper than this like surface level and understand why all of a sudden within 5 minutes we're going deeper than I did with my whole family growing up. Like, yay, soul sister. Nice.
Exactly. Perfect. Sign me
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, you know what? We should just dive in. Like, you can do the
Cool.
intro later.
Yeah.
Let's just go because I want to, Mike, start with, tell us more. Cause I mean, we've already, and we're going to use this anyway, but tell us more about you, like where you come from and what's kind of brought you to the work that you're doing now.
Oh my God, that's such a big question. Um, where do you want me to start in that?
From birth.
Yeah, well, okay.
Well, it's,
Yeah, sweet. I can start there. Yeah, who am I? Like, first of all, like, oh, thank you both for having me on, everyone for who's tuning in. My name's Mike Elliot. What I do in this world right now, presently, I'm a relationship coach, relationship expert. I am all about diving into personal transformation through the medium and the anchor point of relationship. Like I am, and just want to highlight this before I go into who I am, because this is something I feel so passionate about, is I really want in this life to kill this idea of personal development and bring in relational development. Because like, oh, and I get chills there because
yeah,
when I look at the dysfunction of personal development, it's like fueled by this wounded version of self that thinks there's something wrong. Whereas I find like it's the thing that almost creates more isolation. Like I gotta learn the thing, I gotta read the books, I gotta be better, I gotta grow here. And it's like, yeah, but organically, that happens through relational development. If that's the North Star of like, who do I have to become in order to be a strong ally to the people in my life, whether I'm running a team, whether I'm in partnership or a father or a mother, like if I'm parenting, oh, that will lead to personal development, but through the angle, like through the orientation of relationally understanding, like what do I contribute to connection? What am I experiencing and attracting in connection? Just wanted to highlight that piece first because that's kind of maps out who I am now. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to like create a safer environment to help people feel like they can truly be themselves and belong in connection to another person. And from that place, all of the deeper stuff does come up. And
Yeah.
then all of it can be met in the way that it's needed. And then using that relational attunement of like, oh, I can really feel this part was missing. I get to be the ally to bring that in.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I do now. Courtney and I, my partner Courtney, we have a podcast called Together. We are all about conscious partnership, conscious parenting. We do couples work where we really specialize in holding the leaders that are already in love but want to deepen in it. Like they've done so much work, they're in love, they know they are, but there's like these sticky imprints or dynamics playing out. We get to be in there and kind of be the banks and be the ones to attune what's needed relationally to help it resolve in the moment so that there's that foundation of safety and connection. And, I know you're both passionate about Stan Tatkin's work, so are we. And it's like, creating a space to get to know the couple bubble and nurture that bond. So that's kind of me now.
Yeah. And I love that
More of me.
that's
Yeah.
I have to do all this work, which is like actually not focused on the bubble. It's focused on the one, I'm the captain of my own ship rather than we're co-captains of the ship, co-creating this lively thing, this thing we call life together, which is not just you and I in the bubble, for sure it is, but it's also you and I in the bubble of community and nature and animals and energy and all the things. So that's massive.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I get chills there. It's like, who do I become in connection to another? Because
Yeah.
each person we connect with, it's a different, like more of us comes online. Where, this isn't just woo shit. It's like we are energy and we're a very specific makeup of energy. And when that comes into connection with another person, we
Right.
activate different things in them and we have activated within us different things. So let's get to know that space. Like, what's the soul of those two coming together and get to know that and learn from that? Like,
Yeah.
that for me is the ultimate. Like,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly. That's our
yeah,
language. Sure. So like,
yeah,
people say, there's their story, his story, her story, whatever, hers and her story. Sure. But my focus is the story between, like what's the energy between the people?
yeah.
Always. And that's my focus.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
My
yeah,
point is the energy in between.
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
Beautiful.
I like that. And also just helping people understand that we're like it's in relationships that we're hurt or that we feel betrayed or that we feel like we lose ourselves. And so we heal in relationships the same way.
Hmm.
When we get a couple, it's like, and then they come in. I know for Alicia and I will get a lot of people who will say, I think I'm going to need some individual therapy first to figure out my own shit. And then we'll come back to this. And it's like, no, 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 please don't. Please stay here. This is exactly where you need to be. This is where we can heal. This is where we can grow. Why not do this with your partner? Why do this with an individual therapist when you have somebody right here who
Yeah.
can do all of that repairing with you
Yeah.
in a safe
Oh,
place and creating that safety and security? Like that's it. That's the healing. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It's the ultimate because then you can't actually hide and avoid from those blind spots that are happening relationally that can be a little bit hidden or unnoticed, depending on, you know, the experience of the facilitator. But it's like what can happen, I've noticed this play out, is like if it's just the individual work, it's like those stories can build about what's happening in the relationship, and there can be this like avoidance of taking responsibility of, oh wait, I'm feeling super anxious when this comes up, or God, I'm projecting all over you. But if we just do the personal work, we don't get that accurate feedback in the moment of like, whoa, okay, let's just slow down. Because when you're in couples work, what's in those deeper layers of self are going to be the most alive. So you may as well be there. Like, let's do the relational work. Let's,
Yeah, you get to see it.
yeah,
You get to watch that angle go, I can watch
yeah,
you showing up and this part of you show up. So I can see your 12-year-old and your 14-year-old, right? And you're both stuck in this, what you think is self-energy, which is furthest from self-energy. But we get to see that and go, hang on, can you pause and see what's actually happening for your person in real time?
yeah. Yeah. And then what that younger part's needing, and then how this is the cool part is when it's in the moment with the partnership is then your partner gets to be the ally to rewrite the story of whatever is being remembered in the nervous system. Like, oh God, this is coming up. And then like, great, let's all now there's more nervous systems to be allies to attune, like, okay, what is that part needing? What is this reminding you of? Like, oh yeah, totally, you're projecting mom all over your partner right now. Like, and can you see little bits of where that like something's different? Like that's not your mom. Like, yeah, maybe there's some flavors, but can you see that the weight of this is, just as an example, like this is the beauty of doing it in the moment, is the proper orientation of what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas like in individual work, it can still happen, but it's just different. It's less,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much space, it's harder to fully track what is truly happening in the connection.
Sure. And then you're the proxy. So then the therapist is the proxy for the relationship, for mom or dad, rather than the partner.
Yeah,
A partner can be
totally.
that proxy. That creates tenderness and vulnerability and closeness and connection like no other. That's what we want to create.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure you've witnessed this, is like being the banks to guide that process in the moment. What organically happens is they come together.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Once they move through the material that's there, like God, there's so many sessions I'll finish and it's like they're crying and they just pull each other in and they want to hold each other. And they're like, yeah, that's just what is organically there when whatever material's coming up is repaired with in the moment. That's because it's like, oh, it drops into what is actually happening. Wait, this is unconscious. Like the attachment system goes, oh, I am safe. When we're safe, we do want to connect. We do want to bond in those vulnerable places instead of like, I'm vulnerable, get out of here.
Yeah. And then that part that was shown that was vulnerable and scared, you're like 4-year-old or whatever, metaphorical 10-year-old that shows up. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm witnessing my adult version of myself in real time with someone else creating that safe, secure, vulnerable space. I can then be present to that. Like yes, and this is here for your,
Yeah.
so it repairs it in real time, grows it
Yeah.
out. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Which is the ultimate. I love the tangent we've gone on. This is so good.
Okay, great. So go back to how did you get into it?
Yeah. So this
Well,
this is great. I feel like for proper orientation is like to just feeling what we're talking about is like, this is what I'm here for, is this relational space. Like, how did I get here? Going back to birth, this is where I feel like it all comes in. Is like when I entered this planet as Mike, I entered through, and this is of recent, where this is an actual felt sense where I actually feel this in my body. I even may have waves of emotion because I'm still like, oh, it's so new for me. But just the genuine love and care for my biological mom, Diane, who gave birth to me, that woman, whew, she had a journey. Like, so me coming into the world was through my biological mother, Diane, who, she left this world through MAID a few years ago, and she left me a journal pack like a foot thick of her journey because she really had to go do her personal work in order for them to actually honor, choosing to end life. And it was terrifying and overwhelming to go through in the beginning. And it was the greatest gift she gave me because I got to feel what's living inside of me.
Wow.
Aw.
And it was just the level of like pain and turmoil of like the first rape that I read in there was when she was 14 by a 50-year-old man. And then it was just story after story of rape, abuse, putting in, an insane asylum, being raped and mutilated in there by the caretakers in horrible ways. Like I would never wish this on anyone. Watching her friends commit suicide. And I know this is heavy, but it's important. So much turmoil. She was a drug addict. She was addicted to really hard drugs like crack and just meth and like really hard stuff. That's where I started. That's where I based it and, entered into the world through my conception. That woman now, today, when I look back, it was the most courageous woman I know. To have had that level of experience and still choose life. Like, holy shit, to give birth to a human, like with that level of trauma, like talk about following a mama's instinct and intuitive nature that for some reason this human needs to be born. Like when we look at the level of trauma there, like nothing in my mind makes sense of why she had me. That should have been an abortion for sure. Like for her own relief and experience of how much she was already chewing on, but she still chose life. I'm forever grateful for that. So that's where I started, and then separated from birth day one. She just wasn't fit to have me based off of that environment I described, really strong drug addict. And so the full clarity of how exactly that plays out the information isn't there. But from what I've gathered from family members that are still here is that she just wasn't fit to have me and she wasn't able to have me. There wasn't choice, like child services, off into foster care first couple months of my life until the system kicked in. And then my biological grandmother adopted me. And she raised me for the first year of my life and then got diagnosed with terminal cancer. So couldn't continue to be my mother. And so that first year of my life, talk about the ultimate relational rupture of how things are meant to be. When we honor like the sacredness of the bond between mother and child, and you look like, I know, like, Dayna, you have children. Alicia, do you have children? Yeah. Yeah. So like, like the sacredness of that bond and like what's required to create a secure attachment and a sense of everything we live for as a human being, a sense of belonging, feeling confident, having appropriate boundaries within ourselves to discern how close and how far to be with someone, what things to relate with when it comes to like drugs or, levels of danger. Like if we're nurtured in the appropriate way from mom, all of that is implanted. Then we become this really confident, capable person. Our gifts are online and we can move out into the world with so much ease. Like we project, how are they doing that? Well, they've probably done lots of work and they've been held really well. Like that's what our highest expression of health looks like. So for me, I had a lot of, I had a lot of challenges because not breastfed, didn't have the secure attachment to my biological mother, and everything inside of me needed that and wanted it, but it wasn't available. So then I started to like, your listeners would know this language, so I'll just speak it. My primary attachment became my grandma. that's where I was starting to develop safety and consistency and reliability. Like this is a woman that I'm going to merge with, because those first 2 years is about merging. And then after we merge, if we merge in a healthy way, we develop a really strong will. Then at two, once that's completed, then from two, it's starting to differentiate and create a bit more space for mom. After a healthy merge has completed its cycle, the will is there. Okay, now we need to guide this will so it doesn't create a bunch of harm in the world. We got to create more banks, and kind of guide where that flow wants to go so that it doesn't hurt self and others in a gentle way. And so for me in that first year, that whole process got interrupted in really big ways twice. What that ended up looking like was me going then into my third family. Well, not third family, but where I was adopted into the family I grew up in, totally different constellation. I went from basing my whole experience in my nervous system, my attachment system with one person, which was my grandmother, and started to, like, I can feel in my body to this day, like I felt safe. I felt emotionally attuned with, I could feel her love and protection for me. And then all of a sudden, I'm in a new family. And how the day was described to me, like she stayed in just a name, diagnosed with terminal cancer, found a new family for me because this is the fierceness of her. She wouldn't put me back into the system. So she waited until she could find a family where she could stay a part of my life as long as she lived. And she ended up living till I was 5, which was like, thank God. And so I move into this new family at 14 months, and then she becomes the babysitter. So she's still a part of my life. And it was really difficult for me to go from having her as my primary person to I entered a family with 2 other sisters, a mother and a father, a Malamute part wolf dog, cats, like just so many beings, so many nervous systems, so much going on. And how I make sense of it now is on that day I entered the family, like I just fucking froze. Like I just froze and shut down. It was too much to integrate, too overwhelming. And God, I love the family I grew up in. I love them so much. And less emotional. Biological line, very sensitive and emotional, and lots of emotional attunement. The family I grew up with is very much into doing, and we're not going to go into feeling. And don't you dare bring us into feeling. And that was really disorienting for me when it's like, that's my deepest need now as an adult, that I know that about myself. Like my closest circle has to be really deeply emotional and want to go there. And so circling back, my journey was like lots of relational ruptures. And that created a lot of confusion once I went into this family that I grew up in. And how that ended up looking was a lot of my developmental years in that family I grew up in, a part of me searching for where I came from. I wanted my mom, I wanted like my grandma back. And, the day where I was like handed over to my new family, my grandma, what I was told was just kind of like slipped out of the back door and just went off. And I could only imagine now, like the level of grief like that would have been for us to separate in that way. But what's been really confusing for me, and there's the reason why I'm sharing this part of the story, is it was so confusing for me in my attachment system and my nervous system that there wasn't a like transition period where there was like conversation about that, or there was like somehow the field holding my grandma and her feelings of what that would have been like. And my new family, their belief in the way that I've been expressed to in this way is like, we're your family. Like, you don't need to go back to your biology or your birth mom. Like, we're your family. I'm your mom and your dad, this and this and this. And there's no shame in that. But just to name, it creates a really confusing dysfunction inside of me where I keep reaching and saying, I want to connect and understand where I come from more, but I'm told, no, this is where it starts.
Mm.
And so what that led to is lots of rage inside of me as a kid. Like at 7 years old, I think was the earliest time I started punching holes in the wall. Just so much distress in my nervous system. And, and honoring that generation, there wasn't the wisdom there is now where we have the Stan Tatkins and all of this understanding of nervous system regulation and attachment styles and all these things. It just wasn't there. And so I would just have these huge blowouts and punch holes in the wall. And then I would go into a shutdown again. And then I'd be fine for a few months. And then I'd have another freak out and punch holes in the wall. And it created this experience that I project onto my parents of like, I don't know, like, what do we do? Like, I don't know what to do with this. That's so much energy. It's so much emotion. And so they would just hold space and they'd sit there, but like, didn't come and scoop me up and hold me and comfort me and like give me that regulation so I could process the more vulnerable parts, which would have been the grief and the sadness and all these things. Anyways, I'll fast forward this part a little bit. I could go so deep with it, but it created such a sense of loneliness, desperation, feeling like I don't belong, and just like became really isolated. Like I had my number one best friend from when I was like 5 to 12. And then after that, we had a relational rupture. And this is why I'm sharing this a bit too, is that was my safety place of like my connection that was around my age. And then we had some sort of rupture, but then there wasn't the emotional attunement in the field to be like, there was a rupture. Why all of a sudden are they were hanging out every day to not hanging out? Like the parents didn't come in to bridge some sort of repair to help that relationship keep moving forward. So then what that looked like was me in high school just completely isolating. All I did is I picked up skateboarding and snowboarding and I just moved my body as much as I could. And I just like got so like internal. I didn't have friends in high school. I just like lived inside of myself and just survived in a way that felt good, but it was just isolated, which is probably why I'm so passionate about personal development is I did lots of things that were intuitively resourcing that kept me well, but I was so isolated and alone and disconnected. And so that played out in so many ways. It's like I believed that I was ugly and unlovable. And so I just like didn't attract partners. And then as I started to move through high school, it started to lead to, me getting my braces and headgear off, thank God. And then me becoming a lifeguard. And then all of a sudden, it's almost like life seemed to accurately reflect me back. Where I was like, oh, people like me, want to connect with me, think I'm attractive. This is really confusing. But then what started to happen is it felt so good to finally be received in me, like all of me, my tender parts, my like just how I decided to express, and more and more and more of me came online. And then that ended up being like started attracting partners. And then I'm like, oh, this feels so good to have connection, but it created this, healthy evolution. But like when I look back, like, oh, it's not the way how I wanted to do it is I would attract really incredible partners that were years older than me. And then I would get terrified of losing it and end it. And then I'd attract another woman, amazing human being, so able to love me and hold me in ways, which was in my nervous system was so overwhelming. I'm like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Push them away. And I just kept repeating that cycle. And then what that evolved into was me attracting women who I wanted to save. That was safer for me. It was like, oh, they're not going to leave. I'm going to invest all my energy in trying to save this woman. And that way I was able to hang out in those relationships longer, but it was me trying to fulfill all of those wounded parts in me that felt insecure, unmet, all the things. And so fast forward, that cycle played out a few times where I actually believed relationship was about saving the other person. And what that then created was the environment of severe codependence, which I know we just talked about this. Anyone who's tuning in who knows the gene keys in my pearl, it's codependence. That's my shadow, which is why all of this is played out this way. That's what I'm here to learn about. I then attracted a partner that I ended up marrying, and we were together for 7 years. And I like fully expressed codependence in that relationship. When I look back, I can see all the moments I just abandoned myself. I didn't bring my needs to the table. I would give up the gym to hold space. I then started to like really hyper focus on her and what her gifts were. And then I wanted to coach her and then, help her become her best version of self. Because then when I look back, I'm like, oh, right, I was hiding from my personal work where it would have been, bringing my gifts to the world. So I just would give it all to another, and then so unhealthy. And then what that led to was like one day, me curled up on my kitchen floor in the fetal position, bawling my eyes out, shaking, crying, screaming, I don't want to die, after my wife at the time walked in and said, I'm done, just out of nowhere. No previous conversations leading up. She walked in and she said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And I just went into full breakdown into day one. The reason I'm sharing this long story is me entering the world and losing my mom day one. I recreated in my adult life to realize I'm not a victim. But that's what living in that energy of really actually depending on another person to help me feel safe and all these things. Me not getting those ingredients led to me wanting to like fix my partner, and me not having the emotional capacity to just be an ally and a partner and accept who my partner was. And then led to the situation of like the imbalance of somebody who had done their personal work for so many years, led to this place of like, this doesn't feel good. I need to leave. Like, thank God she had that intuitive nature to leave, because I don't think I would have. I just kept going down a deeper spiral of depression and going into coping mechanisms of like drugs. And it just was a bad place. And then so she walked in, and I had somewhere in there, I just had a moment where I could almost see myself looking down at the version of me on the kitchen floor, crying like a little baby, screaming the words, I don't want to die. And I'm like, whoa, I'm actually a baby right now in my body. That's what my body's expressing. I think that's what's been happening inside of me. I think I need help. And that's just when something clicked, something made sense intuitively, like, oh, okay, well, that's how that goes. I'm so terrified of being abandoned that I recreated being abandoned to know and have the felt sense of, and I'm still here. Like I'm okay. Like, yep, now there's some dark thoughts in my head, and it's like these dark thoughts and images are telling me to kill myself. I'm just gonna feel that, and I'm gonna get someone to help me in this world that I feel terrified in. Because at that point, I had pushed away all my friends, I had pushed away my family. I was in just like the little boy that was enraged and pushed everyone away and wanted to just grab onto my partner for safety, but with no resource or understanding that unconsciously I'm just replaying all of the hurt and the wounding inside of me. And so that was the day everything changed for me, where I just started to look for people that I felt drawn to and felt safe with, started to reach out to friends, joined a men's circle, and I was like, can someone help? And then help just started showing up. I started praying, like, you know, one last piece that I'll share in this story is like after my, partner at the time and I separated, I was on one night on my bed, and I just remember the ruminating thoughts and feelings were so intense. It was like showing me images of putting a hose into my truck and just like ending it, like, get out of this. Like, this is the only way out. And I remember hearing a story about Oprah hitting a breakdown moment where she dropped down to her knees and she just like screamed, cried, and prayed, like, help, like, God, help. And then something happened for her. So that she popped in as this beautiful ally in that moment. And I dropped down on my knees and I screamed the same thing. I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. God, help me. And just as I did that, Shawn Mendes, this beautiful human song, It's Not in My Blood, came on, which just spoke to my soul of what I was feeling in the moment. And that was the first time I had that level of connection to something greater than me that wanted me to keep going, that was there loving me. I'm like, and it gives me chills remembering that moment. Like, how is this? I remember just mystified. It blew apart like all of the distress and the wanting to kill myself. So I'm like, I feel so loved right now by Shawn Mendes. And this song, like, how is he talking directly to what I'm feeling right now? And then it just shook something loose. It shook me. It's like when I think back, it's like it shook me into the power of where I'm not actually a victim. And I'm like, you know what, dude, Sean, it's not in my blood either. I am not fucking going out like this. I am not listening to that voice in my head and these images. I need some help. And then so I started to pray for the help and it started to show up. And naturally, it showed up in feminine form. It showed up in masculine form as well, but quite feminine qualities where I just started to lean into spiritual coaches, a soul coach, therapist who could actually hold space for the level of distress that had just been unlocked inside of my body and could help me orient and make sense that I'm not a bad person. Nothing's wrong with me. I'm okay. And then each time I was held in that, my material would come up. I'm like, I'm remembering when this happened with my dad, and I'm remembering when this happened with my grandma, and I'm remembering when this happened, and I would just start to chew through all those layers. And then the more I did that, the better I felt in my body. The more confident I became, the more relationships I started to connect where there was resonance, where I was welcomed, where I was reflected back things that people did appreciate about me. And I started to give my gifts where people could receive it. And all of a sudden, I was like, life feels really good in this way. And then it just led organically to this place of, I want to learn what these people are offering me. And when I look back, it's like they're just being an ally relationally. Like they have done their work enough to hold the bigness of trauma that's moving through me where they're not scared and running away. And so I didn't know that in the moment, but I just started to then learn like, God, this feels so good. I want to offer this. Like if I could become someone that could hold space like this and help someone feel what I'm feeling right now, which is so seen, heard, felt, understood, like, yeah, like if me just still living, if I could somehow become a person that is safe enough to offer an experience like this and save someone from ending their life or just repeating toxic cycles without even knowing it, then I'm all in. And then that led to me kind of being mentored, joining a coaching program, becoming an intuitive coach, and then just going down the rabbit hole of relationship and attachment theory and learning about boundaries. And the more I did that, the more I just started to attract people that wanted my help. And then years of doing that, life kind of just made it obvious enough for me because I didn't have the luxury of like, I know what my purpose is here in life. I was scrambling all over the place, fumbling, making mistakes, trying different businesses until it was so evident life is inviting me into Mike. Keep learning about relationship and bring this to people. This is what you're here to do. And so in a really long-winded way, thank you everyone for listening to my story. That's kind of what led me to this place that we're exploring now when it comes to the relational space.
But literally since day one, like since conception, birth, 14 months old, like literally since day one. So if you could hold space, which I'm sure you do all the time, so this probably is a repetitive question, but for that 14-month-old, let's just say he could fully appreciate, understand, comprehend what you're going to say, but hold space for him, knowing what he's going to go through. Like you're not going to change the realities, the experiences he's going to have. But if you could go back and say to him something now, you're about to walk into this new experience, grandma's going to leave, here's a situation you're walking into, but hold space for him differently. What would you say to him?
Oh, you hit me in the heartstrings. Yeah.
That was my visualization. I'm visualizing
Yeah,
that.
totally. Yeah, thanks for asking that question. The thing that I repeat to him often, and this is a really present one for me, just anchoring it in even more, is like, little dude, that part that does feel safe to connect with like grandma and your mom, you never have to let that go.
It's in there. Like it
Re-
lives.
re- yeah, regardless of what anyone tells you, you can hang on to that.
Yeah.
That matters.
Yeah. And imagine the relaxing of his rage to just be like, oh, thank you. I can hold that and tether
Mhm.
to that. No matter what my reality says, I can tether to that. Rage
Yeah.
just the rage is that. Rage is,
Yeah. Yeah. Like in my body, just as I say that, it's like my shoulders drop back. There's like a relaxation and a relief in my body. Because a lot of, not even saying that it was directly, it's how I made sense of the world of what was being told and expressed to me as the message of don't go back there. Don't bring that part of you to life. We don't want that part. And this is no, this anyone listening, this isn't a judgment of the family I grew up with. This is just in the nature of how things unfolded. That's how I made sense of the world, is I took on the belief I'm not allowed to go there. That's a problem. Like a lot of projections that my biological mother and father have received, even from myself, is, whoa, they're fucked up. Like there's so much trauma and dysfunction. Like let's get rid of that. And the more layers I do in my work, like I want to reclaim that. Like, yeah, that there's trauma there for sure. And I'll boundary the parts that aren't to them, but the essence that lives inside of those humans, I will forever reclaim that and bring that to the world because that's where my strength lives. And I feel like where we come from in our nature and up that generational line, that's the work. Having boundary to the part that is dysfunctional and wounded and scared and believes in isolation, and welcome the parts that do belong, that do have that wisdom, that do have the remembering of tribe and connection and co-regulation, and that the power is in connection and leading with vulnerability. Our ancestors have that, regardless of the hurt and the harm that's happened, that lives there. So in a long-winded way, like letting that little dude know that you're gonna be okay and
Mm,
you're gonna find your people. You're gonna find your people where all of you gets to be here.
yeah.
And like if I were to really talk to him, like, dude, this like higher version of you isn't going anywhere. Like I'm never leaving your side. I'm gonna keep learning what I need to become to parent you well.
Yeah. Welcome home.
Yeah.
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 That's so beautiful, Mike. I mean, there's that I would just thank you for sharing and being so insightful, like to to speak to somebody, to interview somebody and listen to your story of just how well you know everything that you've been through and how you've done the work and how you know where you are now and where you're going. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, these are the kind of people that we want to work with and that
Mm.
we want clients to work with. I know, for Alicia and I, a little disclosure, I think years ago we used to think coaches coming on to the scene, we were a little bit threatened of like, well, who are these people just coming on coaching? We went through all this schooling to do what we're doing, and who are you? We're different now. But we had some parts that were pretty fucking judgy to the people who were coaching. And then it changed. It slowly started to change because we started to lean into the ones that were so, I mean, so insightful. And you're one of those, Mike, where like there's a lot of therapists that we know who have done no work at all. I mean, we wouldn't
Mm.
refer to them, and so and this is what I'd said to Alicia, I was like, this is one of those guys that has done the work. Like we need to have him in our circle, and we need to be able to refer people to him because the
Mm.
impact that you will have in the world is huge. And even especially to me, the biggest one, Mike, is working with men, because for another man to have that balanced energy, like they need you. They need you. I mean, the women do too, but the men really need you. Same as
Mm.
that little boy, although you needed the mama, you
Yeah.
needed that balanced dad too, that was there to hold space for both.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for speaking. Like, oh my God, thank you for the reflections. That means the world to me. Yeah, feeling your experience of me. And I'm glad you named that part of father, because dad, like biological dad, wasn't even really in the picture. And for sure, both those roles are so necessary. And I love what you're sharing. And it's like, God, I see it. I'm a part of Men's Circle and I show up every Wednesday and another one every full moon. And it's like, yeah, I've done the work and I'm going to never stop doing my work. Like, just to be fully candid, like this morning in a session in the receiving fashion, bawling my eyes out as I grieve the parts, as I continually reconnect to my birth mom in that line where it's like, oh, there's so much to grieve there. There's so much to grieve. There's so much in order to let in the love of that connection and that bond. And that work will never stop. And I've noticed like bringing that to the table for another man to witness, like, when I'm sitting, what happens, and there's confidential, but I can share my own experiences. Like when I open my heart up and allow what's in there out, and men can see and feel that, of like, that's what it looks like to be a like tattooed, shaved head, kind of scary, big human being, but it's also a big squishy bear who's crying his eyes out. Like, what? Maybe it just unconsciously gives us permission of like, oh, I can feel what's inside of me that I haven't been feeling. Oh, and then that's where things really start to shift and change and transform for the masculine. Because an oversimplified thing that I would name for the masculine is not enough safety to go in and actually feel what's been suppressed.
Yeah. Well, your birth,
Mhm.
I mean, your family that you're, adopted by, that's exactly what you're describing.
Bingo.
We do it this way. Here's the structure. Here's the box. We don't do the feely stuff. So let's leave it over there. And that's just not just men. That's, generations of society sometimes, a family.
Yeah, totally. And just a name for all the men that are listening, because it's a really common one. And I'll share my experience here with the dad that I grew up with. I saw him cry one time. And this is no judgment on my father. This is what the that generation, what happened in that generation. It's a really common theme. My dad, the one time he cried, I remember sitting on the edge of the bed and he just started screaming. He was like crying and then screaming, "Get out, get out, get out of here." And I was terrified. But what message did that land for me is like, oh my God, don't feel, like, don't cry, don't go into vulnerable feelings. And like, even just there, my body language is like, that's so shocking. And that's really common for a lot of men, that the message they got is you are weak if you cry. But what's actually true is a man who can stand on stage and be himself and bawl his eyes out and not lose his center. That's the ultimate strength. Those are the men we need to be led by. When I look at someone like Tony Robbins, who like often like pours his heart open when something touches him, like beautiful. We need more men like that. We need more men who can just actually allow life to move through them in the moment and not run away. So that there's that information sent to men like, this is what strength actually looks like. Bring your vulnerable feminine part of you held by the banks, where you are, yes, you are stable and strong and productive and offer safety, but you need to feel too, like both.
Yeah. Well, there's so much value. There's so much potent information in those feelings and those vulnerable moments to actually,
Mm.
to line you up and to flow you and to guide you. If you cut that off, man, you're like the resources that you've just lost access to,
Yeah.
visions and ideas and directions.
Yeah. And then what a confusion it creates for the masculine, because then they resort to the things to cope. And that turns to porn, it turns to drugs, it turns to dissociating, video games. It's just like, if we actually look at the behavior of those addictions, it's just a coping mechanism to avoid the thing that's actually needed, which is opening up that vulnerability and moving towards connection to process what those vulnerable experiences are. But the coping mechanism is like, I just need to feel good. I just need to self-soothe. But if there's been hurt and harm in relationship to mom or dad, what gets brought in? Something that's soothing. Because what does mom do in a help? Like, mom is the soothing. So as we look at a little one, and this kid is like, oh yeah, you went out with dad and ooh, that was a little scary. Dad pushed your edges, come back to me. And then, I watch this with my son Cedar, is 2.5. And then he's like, then he feels all his feelings about, that was scary. But then it's like, it integrates because he's being nurtured in the soothing of the smell of mom's hair, or her, you know, pheromones, and like feeling the skin to skin and breastfeeding, whatever it is. And it's like, oh, okay, the juice and the pleasure of life and safety and being just held this way. And then, okay, now I'm going to go out in life again. And I think a lot of men, you know, need to realize there's no judgment or shame on what coping mechanisms that are being used. but understanding you're looking for your mom. Like you're looking for, this is just my view, is it's that part looking to be soothed by mom. It's looking for that part that just needs some regulation, and that's the only way they know how, and self.
Yeah.
What I've watched happen is, God, you get a bunch of men in a circle feeling their feelings. It creates a camaraderie and an organic wanting more men in their life. And it's like, oh, wait, what? A man who can feel, I can feel. Oh, if I can feel, I can be more me. Oh, if I can be more me, I can start to learn how to be a leader and be inspired by others and be triggered in insecurities. But it's not super threatening because they're going to hold space for what I feel about that. And then it becomes what is actually needed for men. I don't know how a man can evolve to his enlightened self without brotherhood.
Yeah. So that's the way you
And
coach, invite them into like a group kind of scenario.
my own personal work is that's the work I do for myself, is regularly being a part of a men's circle. And in the men's circle, I practice my leadership skills in that by a role what's called kinging, which is facilitating the night. The work that I do with men is bringing the byproduct of me basting myself in that environment to hold men in that same way. Where, like, if we're touching something, because mainly what I do currently is one-to-one work or two-to-two work with Courtney. And then we're shifting that in our business model really shortly here, where it's more group work. And so it will be in the way that you're describing, where it's like actually bringing men together and creating this environment to happen. But currently what it looks like is I get to bring just what lives inside of me by me doing that work and offering over that safety, where a man gets to witness me crying when they share something in their head about what happened, but then I feel what would be appropriate, and that is the grief and the sadness about that. And then usually what happens is those mirror neurons are like, oh,
Oh,
I actually am sad about that. And then it starts to train them that it's okay to feel now. If this dude can cry, I can cry. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, but I love
yeah.
the individual, but I think that's a really good point that you made of then taking that, just having I ran some men's groups at the jail years ago, and what you described is bang on.
Mm,
It's called
yeah.
Wild at Heart program, but it was really good. And we ran it for years. And yeah, once you get men tough, big tattooed up guys in a group, burying their souls and having a safe space to do that, everything changes. The unit,
Everything changes.
they become the leaders of the units, and they go back to their own individual units, the units, because of what they were doing.
Oh, I love hearing that you do that or have been doing that work. You must have watched the video or the documentary, The Work?
No.
Oh, exactly what you're describing, where they would bring this modality, like this work that you do, into the jails. And like we're talking, you know, really intense, what's the word? Convictions
Yeah.
that why they're there. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the field. If you haven't, I'd highly encourage watching it. It
Oh,
really shows what you're describing. It's palpable of how much men need
Mm.
that, in that the constellation, that to sit in circle with other men of all different types, to have mirrors and reflections of what lives inside, and then to actually be allies to hold space for what comes up when there is that brotherhood. Because I'm sure you've seen it, where it's like it shakes something loose, and then it's almost impossible to not have vulnerability come up. Would you
yeah,
say?
for sure. And we made sure
Yeah.
there's two of us that would facilitate, so myself and another gentleman, because then I would bring the feminine part to it, because none of
Mhm.
these guys had obviously a family of origin where they could be their vulnerable, sensitive selves. They all came in, I'm talking like, you name it, I've seen, I worked with it. Like, you think of the worst crimes, I've been with those guys, sat in space with those guys.
Wow.
So then we would bring in, so we would, we'd use all kinds of stuff to kind of start to, create the scaffolding, like, movies, or, go and break stuff or build stuff as like tangible things first. We break them down to this, and then we get to their core wound stuff. And then when they start to get scared to share their stuff, that's where I could come in and have that like feminine of like making space, and like the mom energy of making space for that 14-month-old or that little boy. And I could
Yeah.
chronic one-on-one space within the context of the group, which opened then the door. As long as I do with one, it would just be like, it'd be like dominoes. Then the rest would just kind of follow suit. Usually it'd be really
Yeah.
easy. The rest would crack to each other. But I'm curious your thoughts of having like a female present in those kind of environments.
Hmm. I think you just described a perfect example of how beneficial and necessary it is, like how I make sense of it. There's really powerful work that happens where it's just men. And what I would say is the healthiest organization or dynamic is having the feminine present there too. When I look at this is what kind of took this is what I feel like led to together and the work that Courtney and I do. What I feel like what led it to take off is because there's a man and a woman there. There is the masculine and the feminine present. When we look at wounding, what is wounding? It's these relational misses in our attachment system while we're developing secure attachment. And so if things were missed between the masculine and the feminine, if what is necessary for that secure attachment is the bond being really healthy and safe between mom and dad, and that to trickle down to hold space for the child. If that part's missing, we need to recreate that environment for the deeper wounding to heal ultimately, or else how I've noticed it, and I'm not saying this is true, but where in my consciousness, how I make sense of this is the limitation of just men's work is without the feminine presence, there is a part that will always be missing.
Yeah. And vice versa.
In that healing movement.
And vice versa. Like, I think to make space
yes.
of the masculine is really great. And they can see stuff that I would have missed. Like Darren would see things that I would miss. Darren with my partner. And then but I could bring that, like, I'm instantly thinking, as you're telling your story, I'm seeing that 14-month-old kid. Like my mom part instantly seeing that kid. I'm feeling him in my body. So I'm focused on him where maybe Darren would have missed that. So I'd bring that to our sessions of like, hey, just gonna go back to that kid you talked about and bring him back in, like bring him into the session again. So yeah, I think having both of those flavors is, at least from my opinion, that was really, really valuable. We'd never do without both of us present because they were, long-standing groups, but have us both in there was a big difference.
Yeah, and you just named it there too. And this is what I think is why both roles are so necessary for the deeper work is the masculine and the feminine brings different qualities. They're just like we hold different roles in healthy development. Like, it's just, this is an oversimplified statement, but the feminine is really feeling oriented, lots of extra hormones, more of that nurturing, tending, holding, and then the masculine is more of the banks, the boundaries, the like guiding things to shift and change when they need to, like bringing in power and radical self-responsibility, accountability, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's such different roles. And so what I've noticed in relational healing, I support couples, like just me and couples, and Courtney does the same. But when we come together and it's 2-2, we finish and usually we finish in tears of just so much grace of what ends up moving. And we look at each other and like, oh my God, thank you for what you bring to that, because this is so easeful when we're both here.
Yeah.
Like the things that shift and we've had that feedback from clients too, of like, whoa, you too. And I'm like, well, it's, what's moving through us. It's not just us too, but what I feel like is being felt is like, oh, a relationship where they're doing the work. I mean, we're not perfect. We have all our shit. That's why we have support too. But what they are feeling is, oh, there's two nervous systems that are representing mom and dad. And they're orienting, like, because Courtney and I are always orienting to our bond first. Like, we're always like co-regulating, we're touching to help digest the energy of separation and hurt and harm. And we've noticed like a couple's bond in proximity to that other bond is the thing that helps digest the energy. But if you remove one of those roles, it's so much harder to get to the total new story and the new movement.
Yeah.
You guys you're mimicking what these couples have missed, right? I mean, you're role modeling in the moment what secure or conscious relationship looks like. And for people to see that is so impactful because they don't have it in their programming. I mean, we see couples all the time. They're like, we'll tell them something. They're like, yeah, that sounds really great, but what are you talking about?
Yeah,
like they have no idea.
right.
They're like, and so I know Alicia and I will always use our relationship. We don't bring them in, but we talk about them. We're like, okay, let me like take this back. This is what we do. And this is what this looks like. And we didn't come from this either. This wasn't just branded naturally. Some of it was for both of us, depending on which one of us were looking at our histories, but you guys are you're being proxies for these two to show this is what security looks like. And you're the master regulators. It's beautiful that couples get to witness that.
And I want to add to that too. And, what really comes up for me when you share that, excuse me, is both of you having those partnerships that you're all in on and doing the work with translates in that work that happens. Like, even if the partners aren't there, and this is, I think, so important to name, because this is the beauty of nurturing a bond and partnership, is that lives in the nervous system. And, I imagine I'm totally projecting over both of you here right now, but my imagining is you can draw on those places of your connection and where you feel supported in your relationship and have that translate into the work that you're doing with your clients.
Yeah, it's
Is that
true.
an accurate projection? Yeah.
Part of my bias is exactly that. I don't know how I would do what I do for a living without having my long-term partnership. Without having that, I wouldn't have that bought and lived experience. I wouldn't even know how to even, I could do the top down, book knowledge and CBT, sure. But to actually bring that energy to, I don't know that I could do that authentically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so different how Courtney and I have noticed it. It's like, it's such a, and there's like, God, there's practitioners that I work with that are single and I still get so much from it. But what I've noticed is I have to discern what material that is coming up in me and understand, does this need to be held in a relational space where there is like a sacred bond happening? Because there's some parts where it needs to be held by like that, where there is that safety of mom and dad are connected. And there's parts of my work, like if I were to bring it into someone who doesn't have that experience yet and they're single, like their ongoing experiences that they're single, like there's parts that just can't be held in that nervous system. And there's no discredit to that person, and I'm just saying what's true for me. It could be different for others, but based off of my unique trauma, there's places where there's limitations to certain practitioners because they're not in sacred relationship. Courtney and I, have someone where they're like our couple, like who supports the soul of our relationship, where we receive couples work. It's like, we couldn't imagine. We haven't met anyone yet, but I'm sure they exist. But the reason we keep consistently going to that person to be held is they are living sacred relationship. I can feel that. It changes the language that she uses. It changes the way that she orients us in our relationship when there's rupture. What I notice is there's a stronger, if I were to really pinpoint what it is I'd say there's a deep knowing and understanding that the highest realized safe self comes through bond, like the bond, the connection, the pairing between two people. And what I notice is when there's material and imprinting that comes up, and the language I use here is called pinging. Like if our material is perfectly pinging off of each other, and I'm projecting my mom onto Courtney and she's projecting her dad onto me or whatever, and we're just like, our materials in what we're working through is so similar and we project that all over each other, we can't find the felt sense of connection. What this person can do is advocate for the bond, remind us of the bond, remind us that where we are connected. And I noticed that's a unique quality that's necessary in some of those really big places that's just generational. We can see how that plays out if we look at the big picture between war and these, that's what that looks like. We are needing energy that is holding the banks and the boundary of like, wait a minute, don't get lost in your story here. Let's come back to the bond. Let's come back to the connection. Let's feel the resource of the connection of where you have moved through things time and time again. And that reorientation and advocacy energetically, I think, is the thing that really creates miracles when it comes to relational healing.
And probably her
kind
ability.
of went on a tangent there, but
I was like, probably her ability to speak from her own lived experience, to be able to, place of, I understand that this content wants to dive in. I understand how you want to become individual captains. Like I can, empathize, compassionate with your individual experiences, experience can soften into, and I also know this bond and how, precious it is and how much work it takes, but why? Like we're advocating for that bond, like that shared space and like the energy, because we see it, but we live it. And so when you live it daily, you can advocate for it better, easier. That's my bias.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's wild, just as you share that, it's like, that's the unconscious energy exchange that does happen between people. Like I would just say from my own experience, and maybe I'm just super hypersensitive, is like, I can feel that in both of you. Like I can feel like, oh, whoa, I can feel that partner. I can feel that partner that's there. I can feel that other. And I'm like, oh, that's actually just feels refreshing and relieving
Yeah.
knowing that there's that like, oh, I this is what matters to me, like how it translates for me. And like this is what I'm continually wanting to deepen and learn about. I get to learn from the gifting of where you guys have gone in your bond and feel what that feels like of like, oh, that feels nice. I need to be more around that more to have that inform how to show up in this relationship, which I think, that's a whole nother piece. But this is the cool part of what comes from this and what we're talking about is the more the relational work happens in the partnership, the more it will just attract that desire to be around more couples that are doing that too, because we really can't just do it on our own. Like Courtney and I can keep doing our conscious partnership thing, but we need to be consistently connecting into other relationships so that we can see where we have blind spots, things that we're still needing to work through, feel the sensation of like, oh, that's something I long for. Let's do our work around that of like that quality or this quality or like, you know?
Yeah, like having your like
Yeah.
master couples in your mind, like who do you have that you can look at and go, how would they resolve this or how would they navigate this? Because I know they've been
Yeah.
20 plus years and they're a master couple. So how would they do this?
Mhm.
It's important.
Which
Yeah.
which makes it so much more easeful and playful and fun. Because it's like what I notice is like we can chew through something and Courtney and I can chew through something in our relationship. And then we have a community event around like solstice or something, and we just witness another couple and we're like, there's just like something that simply drops in and like everything shifts and changes. And it was just by being in proximity to something that kind of shook loose whatever story was happening or whatever needed, like, oh, that's so much more easeful doing it that way. And do you guys have you ladies worked with Terry Real or Thomas Hubel's stuff very much?
A
Yeah, a
little
little
bit.
bit. So
Yeah.
Terry Real talks about this piece, and I find this so fascinating to bring in like the science part of it is, Terry Real in his book called Us names that there's been all these studies done where like why is that happening? Like when we all come into a group space when there's more people, why do things seem to just move more easily? And they've actually been able to track this data that when we come into connection with other people, there's a wisdom in our mind, in our brains that will start to use the bandwidth of other brains to digest material. So when we come into connection with other people and like when we look at relationships, it's like what's been processed and worked through in two minds living together in connection to other minds. It's like just the material starts to digest. Like all of the work and like because I think there's a lot of couples that there'll be this point of like, do we just have to do this hard work all the time? This is so serious. This isn't fun. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, yes, and it gets to be fun when you start to like just move towards the environments that are enjoyable, that are playful, that are fun, that will still go deep,
Mm.
especially in our worlds. It's like try to have a have an exchange without going deep at some point. But then it's like great. Then we just get to be in the enjoyment of the present moment and use that intelligence that we don't have to think about that does process the shit, that does process the trauma, the dynamics, the dysfunction. I
Well,
find that
energy is
so cool.
tangible, right? Energy is tangible, has a
Yeah.
frequency. When you're in that frequency, if you're open to it, you're going to align with and vibrate with, and you're like, oh, that feels really good. Happens all the time. Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Joe Dispenza talks about that too. I mean, when he brings people into these ballrooms and just that energy of everybody starting to get into that heart coherence, right? Just it's like it I wrote down, I just want to say it because I'm like, we people say all the time it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to keep or a tribe, like Alicia and I will say often, is like it takes that tribe or that village of people around you forever to keep growing and keep evolving. And so when you get around couples and I know that's what I would say to my husband when we meet another couple that is so aligned and just in that space, you're like, you get so excited. It's like a kid in like the toy store when you're like, that's the toy I want. You're like, that's the couple I want to be around. Like I want to be around them because, like you said, Mike, then I get downloads of your stuff and I get to just watch. And I mean, for me, there's nothing more beautiful than watching a couple. I could sit for hours and just watch them, like especially young couples. Like they just touch and they're like, oh, I want to do that. Let's go and play and do that. That looks really fun. I want to go back there.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so juicy. Like, I love that. I love just even feeling that. Yeah, when you bring it up of like, oh, there's just for me, that's some of the juiciest places is getting to witness other couples and watch that what that invokes. I'm like, oh, I noticed for me, I'm like, oh, now I want to be closer. I want to be more. I'm gonna go rub her hair. That looks so nice. And then, whoa, what she did when that guy did that, like, oh yeah, oh, now she's rubbing her hand on my chest. I love that so much.
And the flip of that too
Yeah.
is that who's watching you? I'm always in my mind because I'm raising teenagers and I always have, Dana can attest, hundreds of kids metaphorically, but a lot of kids all the time. Like there's never just one or two kids in my, like literally four right now. There's always extra kids in my house. And so I'm always in my mind being like, who's watching? And I want to be that for them. So I want to make sure that I'm in an energy space with my partner where they're feeling that from us, where they're feeling that love and that connection and play. And we're going to have conflict that's safe in a container of like, we're safe, we're secure, we can disagree on stuff. But I'm very mindful that there's young minds always paying attention and watching. And I mostly feel like when we're in that space and there's teenagers around us, that they're more loving and kind and to each other.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's energetic.
Uh, yeah, I love that piece and just the importance of that modeling. Like, I don't know for you too, but when I look back at my childhood, I'm like, a lot of the confusion and hurt that lives inside of me would have been resolved. So much of it would have been resolved if I saw more repair processes that weren't behind closed doors and where there just was more connection, where there was more like hugging and kissing, like just the simplicity of like, do you like each other? Like, do you want to be? And like, can I see how you move through things that are uncomfortable? Because I'm gonna have to know how to do that. And so I love that you brought that piece in too, Alicia, because it's not about being perfect in the dynamic, but Courtney and I have an experience. Quick story is we worked with Sarah Swain a few weekends ago. So drove to Alberta and, we have our childcare and, Cedar's auntie in the truck with us and Courtney and I had a rupture and we moved through it in the truck. And then, our friend in the back was like, whoa, that was like quite a thing to watch you guys move through that. And I think that's what's necessary for children and for other people. Of like, I think a lot of what can happen in society is like, let's just show the highlight reel. But like, how are we going to learn from each other if we don't lead with vulnerability and actually expose the parts where we maybe did miss each other and things did come up, but then showing in the moment, like, and this is what that looks like to move through that and come back to connection. I feel like that's the ultimate piece
Yeah.
that we need right now in society of like, how do we come back together? It's not about judgment and shame of like, well, you did this and that did, and now like, okay, great. But then now what does it look like to find your seat again? Take a breath. Guide something new and different. Come back to co-regulation. Acknowledge like, yeah, that wasn't okay. I said that. It wasn't okay. I did that. Do you need to share about that? Do you have any feelings about that? Oh, yeah, I totally see why you would feel that way. I'm so sorry. I'm really gonna, in the future, focus on bringing this instead. Like, kids need to see that too, so badly.
Yeah. That's our
Yeah.
goal. I think if we're
Yeah.
working on that, that's literally, has to be part of what we give to the world. That has to be part of our gifts that we share. Like that's our role. At least that's my role. Like that's a huge part of it in this world.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Us too. I always that any type of if we don't, I mean, kids don't learn anything about relationships in school except what they experience. There's no class of like, this is how you repair and this is how you problem solve and this is how you attune to somebody. And they don't learn that. So we have to model that all day long to them. And we don't, I mean, unless it's a heavy conversation, we don't hide anything from our kids. We do all of it in front of them because
Oh,
then they get that mapping, right? Their neurons wire and they go, oh, okay, that's how you do it. And then they tend to come to us when they have their own conflicts of like, okay, I'm having this conflict with this friend. What do you think? It's like, because they've seen us in conflict. So, and repair and safely, right? It's
yeah.
like, we still have each other's back, even when we're in conflict. We're like, oh, because we have agreements of, what regulates us and how we decide to be in relationship. And when we share that with our kids,
Oh,
I mean, that's gold.
Yeah.
oh, yeah. That's
Energy has
so
to,
much
right?
gold.
The bubble needs to win. The energy has to win always, not me or you, the energy. Because I live in there and we all live in there. So I'm going to make sure that energy
Yeah.
potently.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
our I love how Stan says that, right? That it's our ecosystem, that bubble. So, our couple bubble is what's good for you is good for me, is good for our relationship. But our kids feel that, right? That bubble that we're in is their whole world. And so if we can regulate each other and we know how to take good care of each other, then they can feel safe, right? And then that's the breeding ground for, oh, I'm okay to be me. I feel safe. It's okay for me to feel, it's okay for me to explore, for me to screw up, for me to have conflict, for me to whatever, because we're being led in love and acceptance and nurturing and showing that it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to have conflict. This is how you do it. You're going to have conflict. You're going to be angry. You're going to get frustrated. All these things are normal. And there's space for us to sit on that bench together and be like, hey, we can feel that. We can sit in that. I'm not
Oh,
rescuing you. I'll let you feel it.
oh, that's the ultimate. Oh, I love that. And I just thank you for sharing that too, because I love feeling that stage of parenting. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it gets to become, is this safe place to actually bring the challenges that are out in life back to where it's meant to. It can, yes, my imagining is that there's going to be that phase where, especially teenage years where it's that big kind of push away is like they're going to want to explore getting information and resources from other people. But that place that you just named there, Dana, is like, yeah, when that is happening in the day to day, the health in that nervous system and attachment system will come back to mom and dad of like, help. Like, I don't know what to do here. And that just brings me so much joy to feel that, because that's what shapes a safer, more enjoyable, playful world to live in.
And they
And
bring
it's
that
you.
up. They're like, help them and help
Oh,
this. And can you help them all, mom? I'm like, bring them all. Let's go.
yeah, yeah, totally. And just what a gift that comes from that. And I'm curious if you've seen this in couples work, is it's so consistent that I'll watch this happen. I had was supporting a couple weeks ago where all of a sudden there was this huge repair process where the couple came back into connection. And the second that just genuine connection happened, the kid came running in the room and then just wanted to like just snuggle in with mom and dad. And I was like I get chills. Like it brings up so much emotion because like that's it. That's the unspoken language that's beyond the mind, that's felt in the nervous system. It's like they know whether mom and dad are connected or not. And when mom and dad are in that juice, like they want to get in there. And
They
like,
do.
oh, that's the motivation. We've watched that so many times where all of a sudden it's like, whoa, connection point kids come running in. And sometimes it can be like, oh, sorry. Da, da, da. I'm like, no, no, no. Can we all just slow the field down? Like this is everything. Like this is why we would even want to do the work. Let's let this take place, take up space. Like let the kids soak in what you just worked for. Like that's everything. Like feel yourself in
Oh,
the connection of that bond while your kid just wants to nestle in. Like that's accurate feedback to where you're at right now, which is in your hearts in the present moment. Bonding. Yes. More of that.
Yeah.
yes. Yes. And it speaks to, for people who, maybe don't believe in the idea of energy,
Mhm.
that it right there, that's what it shows, right? Is that these kids are in a different room and they feel this frequency, this energy, and they're like, I need to go towards that. I need to go towards that. And
Yeah.
they listen and they come. And we will do this with couples. I mean, this is a pretty typical homework thing that we'll say, if that they'll do in a session of some type of embrace and holding it and just feeling each other's bodies and nervous system calm before they let go, and practicing that in the session and then saying, now go home and do that a couple times a day and notice what happens. And people come back and they're like, okay, my kids, first of all, they stopped everything and they just stared in awe, and then they came towards us. And like everybody who has young kids says the same thing. And it's like, okay, so you're going to do that every day, at least twice a day. At least, if you can do more, but at minimum, this is a twice a day thing that you'll do. And it repairs families. It brings that energy of safety and security.
If you have no kids,
Yes.
and if you have no kids,
Oh,
your dog or your cat will do the same thing. When
yeah.
you're in coherence, you're in that space. Like I have dogs and cats and chickens, wild things, and they'll like run towards me. Like we're in that space. They want part of it. It's like juice of life. They want it. They want to drink.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah. I'm so glad that we're talking about that because it's like, that's it. It's like it showed, like nature shows it time and time and time and time and time again, that the number one orientation for a felt sense of enjoyment and safety and where a happiness lives is in connection. And when there's good connection, we want to move towards it. Whenever Courtney and I go to make love, I have to kick the cat out of the door because he
I
just wants to get
know.
right in there. It's like, okay, like great. And dude,
My dogs are
but it's like,
attacking.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's been a few times he's like right, and it's TMI here, but he's been like on my back. I'm like, okay, this is great. All right. Enjoy the connection and the sweetness, my friend. But this is such an important piece to talk about. And yeah, I want to circle back to what you shared, is if this is okay, Dayna, just when you talked about the energy, because I know this can be a big one for a lot of people. Like, oh, you're talking about energy, you lost me. It's all woo woo. But I feel like one that can be really palpable and relatable, you named the example with when couples come and the kids come, yes. But if you don't have that dynamic, one way that I can almost guarantee is when you're in partnership and you see your partner connecting with another person, how badly do you want to go and connect with your partner?
Yeah.
When there's a threat toward, like what can happen for a lot of attachment wounding, what's happening is in health, and this is what Courtney will do. If I'm connecting with another woman and like something comes up, she'll just come over and she just takes up space and she leans in and she kisses me and she just nurtures that part of like, I need to feel our bond. I need to feel connection. And I feel like that's a really great way to just notice how important energy is, how it can express in a lot of dynamics in the, like in a unhealthier expression is like jealousy, anger, rage of like, how dare you connect, like seeing that connecting with another person of the opposite sex is a threat. It can feel that way if inside you haven't honored the energy of, I really need co-regulation and connection to feel safe.
Yeah.
Like if that part isn't happening, seeing another person that you want to be really connected with, seeing someone connect with another person will be terrifying.
Yeah.
But if you can, yeah.
Yeah. Or it can create a sense of like, I've been married a long time, so I don't have the, don't have the jealousy piece. When I see that happen, it brings a piece of like pride or like almost like novelty.
Yeah.
Like it brings up that in me of like that. It's like it's a different energy that brings up where I'm like, I want to sit back and watch it and just like relish it and be like, that's amazing.
Yeah, which I feel like that's the healthy expression of it, is to feel what I project anyways onto you, is that there is such a secure attachment with your partner where it's like, yeah, my partner connecting means he's going to get the parts that I can't meet met relationally, and I get to meet that man and connect with that man. Like a resource connected man with many people is a way more enjoyable human being to be making love with, connecting with, communicating with. But in our society where there's like that, no, it's just me and my partner, it's like, oh God, things are going to get ugly because we can't, we're such dynamic human beings. We can't get all of our relational needs met from one person.
No, we were never meant to. We were also
Yeah.
herd oriented. So we are never meant to. We're meant to be in relation and communities. And so we need things met elsewhere. Transparent, right? Like obviously Jay knows, my husband knows, I get lots of my emotional deep stuff from Dayna. Like he's like, you need to phone Dayna. I'm like, thanks, I'm going to do that. So I appreciate that about it. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I just wanted to speak to, that there's also the energy of like the attunement of noticing your partner, or it could be a child also, of like maybe you are speaking to somebody else and you notice that your partner is feeling a little lonely over there or feeling something, right? And being like, oh, like we've got eye contact. I'm like, oh, come here, or like I'm going to go to you and I'm going to tend to that part of you and not shame it and not, bring it up in a way of just like I'm repairing that part, because that again, that's energy, that's felt sense. Anything in your body is energy. I mean, and it's real, right? I mean, every feeling is the language of the body. So that's real. You can say that your thoughts are, illogical or whatever you want to say, but the feeling is always real. So when we're connected enough with our partner, we can feel that. We feel what they need. And then we either listen to it consciously or we have our own stuff and we're like, oh, I'm not right now. You should be able to do that on your own. Or, oh, why are you, if we're not regulated ourselves and in tuned enough. But I love it when just for partners to know that we are in each other's care, and we should be noticing our partner in different scenarios when we're around other people that if we don't know them well, they could be threatening, right? New people, I don't know who this person is yet. And I feel like that's where we get some of that masculine and feminine energy coming out too, right? Some of the masculine of protection and, you know, what's happening over here. But I just feel like it comes back to speaking of that, you know, I know Alicia and I do a lot of this work of when couples are going to be around other people, that we have agreements, we know how we want to be. Like there's a plan, cause it's us going there. It's always us.
Yeah.
And we'll divide in those settings, but how do we choose to be? How do we want this experience to be where we both still feel that interconnectedness, even though we're, you know, connecting with others?
And not just
It's just
partnerships,
so,
all relationships. Like in all relationships, you do that. So when you do it well in your partner, that expands. And like if I'm with Dayna in public and it's, you know, if she comes to one of my events, whatever, I know she's going to feel, so I will make sure I align myself right beside her, sitting beside her and Dennis to make sure they're good. And I'll let my husband go over there, take the rest of the room. Right. So it's in all relationships that are important to you that shows up.
yes. That inner circle, I love that I get to be a part of this conversation, because that's just that is the sweetest place to be, that obliterates this projection that's codependence. I feel like there's a lot of couples that resist what is being invited here, of actually attuning and caring that deeply about your partner and your inner circle, and bring your mothering and fathering qualities to that person to help them heal and rewrite their story. It's not being the role of mom and dad, but it is mothering and fathering those parts. That's really ultimately, if we're talking about conscious, like friendship, partnership, that's what we're saying yes to. Like, yeah, I care about what's happening inside of your body, and it's going to be different every day. And I'm devoting and choosing to attune to you and care about that, and give you the resource that I have in the moment to the best of my ability. And I love what you named, so much maturity in that. Of course, like talk about parenting self, but parenting the soul of the relationship by going in with a safety plan, doing check-ins rather than just allowing the unconscious conditioning to trigger in the moment and then it creating rupture of like not feeling seen and heard. Talk about going in unprepared to a situation relationally of like a bunch of other like attractive humans or whatever. And it's like, this is all scary and overwhelming. But if you go in with a plan, you know, like you named, both of you named, it's like, hey, sweetie, like, hey, I'm going to go connect with this person. Like, does anything come up for you? How are you feeling around that? Like, what are you needing? What would help you feel connected? You know, or just acknowledging like maybe you know, you and your partners, or we all go with our partners to an event, and like maybe it was a short sleep. Maybe the kids are going through something and there's less resource on the field. Guess what? Probably there's going to be more tenderness, more like insecurity. There's going to need to be more tending, and to have that information going in before. Oh, it feels so good, the juicy of that intimacy, to be able to provide an experience of safety and connection for your partner, how satisfying that is for self. Like, this is why I wanted to, like, it's not codependent. It's the most enjoyable, pleasurable experience you can ever have to be that deeply bonded and connected to other humans. Like, people comment on me and one of my best friends, Dr. Kevin Preston, like we are so affectionate with each other. Yeah. And Dayna and I got an inside joke there but we have such a deep connection and bond, and we are attuning to each other regularly. And it's so enjoyable. God, it brings in our greatest strength, our attributes. You know, as an example, I'm sure Kev would be okay with me sharing this, but last time he went on stage at the MIM, he like checked in the morning, like, hey man, can you just hold space for me? I need to feel your energy there. Like, can you see me and what it is that I'm wanting to step in? And like a part of me is like feeling a little tender, and like nervous. Like, can you just like hold that space? And then vice versa. Like, I'll be going through some sort of healing movement in my life. And I'm like, man, there's like this really baby part of me right now. Can you just like let me know that you're there and that I'm okay? And that, like, and then he like, oh man, yeah, that matters so much. Tell me more about it. And I'm like, oh, this. And I'm like, oh, and then it like helps those parts heal. And like, this is ultimately what it's about. It's like bringing those tender human experiences to the table and like, hey, how do we hold this together?
Yeah.
Because ultimately that's going to benefit self. The personal development like it comes from having connections that are consistent and reliable and want to help be allies to rewrite the story where you can just be safe in your body, where you can express what you want to express, where you can bring your gifts to the world and not be so afraid of judgment and put down and rejection.
Yeah. I wouldn't call that codependent at all. I would just call that's just love. Like as you're describing everything,
Yeah.
this actual love to me.
Yeah.
It's an action
Yeah.
word. Love isn't just a feeling. Action. Love is an action. So let's just
Yeah.
do love for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is so important. And I like just because there is so many places where it can be like, you're inviting me into what? Isn't that so much codependence? My partner should have to do that on their own. And I'm like, no, that's what created the hurt is them having to actually figure out how to do it in that phase of development on their own. No, you want to learn what's happening there. What are you representing or contributing to that connection? Because this is the thing too. And if we were to like really go into the depth of what's happening in those places where there's trigger, is like we are contributing something that is familiar to the hurt that did actually happen that wasn't actually okay at a point of that development. So we need to take responsibility that my qualities, my power, my potency will trigger and remind that experience. It's my job to attune and give the ingredients that we're missing,
Exactly.
owning it, naming it. Like mine as an Aries man to my partner who is sensitive and has wounding around an empowered masculine, it is my job. It is my job in certain places to be like, hey, sweetie, I can really hear you feel like hurt by what I shared or the energy that I'm in right now, and that this feels scary. Yeah, I'm in a fire right now. I'm really focused on work and so inspired and lit up. And my imagining is that really reminds me or reminds you of, I won't share who, but just reminds you of this man. I
Mhm.
for sure I'm in that. And I can really imagine how scary that was,
Yeah.
where
Well,
that wasn't known and that did create hurt. And I'm here. Do you need a hug? Like, I'm with you. I'm okay. Like, I want you to know that you're okay. Like, offering over the reassurance that's needed and slowing the field down and offering over, like, yeah, I own that is happening. You are feeling that.
yeah.
Yeah.
People will give you kickback or give us feedback sometimes when you say it's my job to do that. Of course, it's my job. I don't know if you get this sometimes with your clients, they'll get resistance to like, why is that my job? So my smart is like, well, it doesn't have to be. You don't have to if you don't want to. And they'll just keep, you just keep reinforcing their adaptations that are no longer adaptive because they're an adult, not 14 of defense system. So you guys can keep doing that dance if that makes you feel good, or try to make it your job. You can help, take apart those defenses of her adaptations so she can feel soft and tender and like move towards and grow these parts. So yeah, I mean, the idea of like, it's your job. People will give us sometimes, I don't know if you guys get that, but I get lots of flack when I say that. Well, yeah, it's your job. And they're like, well, I don't want it to be or shouldn't be or whatever their own defenses are. I'm like, okay, then don't. Keep doing what you're doing. How's that working for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Great differentiator.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Great differentiator, Alicia. I think it's so important that you name that too, because I'd say I'm imagining that we're all inviting like conscious partnership, sacred relating. Sacred relating is not for the faint of heart. That's not everyone's chosen desire to deepen in intimacy and the felt sense of connection in this life, and that's okay. So anyone who's listening, like, oh well, you don't have to. And if you're listening to this, my imagining is you're curious about it. Your soul wants to figure that out. And it is your job to care about what's happening for your partner. And it is your job. It's my job to take responsibility for what I might represent in my partner or any person in my life. Like if something were to come up between us, I would get really radically curious of like, I wonder what I represent and what I'm perceiving as, oh, I've noticed something shifted in our energy when we were connecting. Like, I want to check in about that. Are you like feeling my story I'm telling myself is like there's something got triggered and like, are you okay? I just want to check in. What's happening for you? And then so that I can, like really ultimately so we can get curious of what's coming up in the present moment. Oh, actually, like, yeah, this happened. I'm feeling scared. I'm remembering this experience. Like, oh, great. Like, let's figure out what that information is that's present in the safety of us coming together.
Yes. It's really
Like,
not rocket science. Like, because you're the proxy. If you choose that role, you're the
yeah,
proxy for every other experience, every other relationship. Okay. And we can, in real time, when it comes up, just do the work. People, probably don't believe us when I say, I'm like, relationships aren't that hard. They're actually, once you get through
yeah,
the learning phase is hard. Once you get past the learning phase,
yeah,
it's
for sure.
like, I think it's pretty easy. I'm married 22 years. It's pretty easy, right? It's not that hard, but
Yeah,
it's because you put the work in, and
that's
the
right.
is natural, and the energy that exists, it becomes your main focus. So if that's your focus and that's your life depends on it, you're going to put all the good stuff in there and you're going to do the work to make that that sacred space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me feel that in you because there's definitely places where I still find it hard. And that's the ideal is finding where it's not so hard. And it's easeful most of the time, but whoa, some of the pieces that come up there. And so I just want to acknowledge like those listening of like in the beginning, like when I think of when Courtney and I first started, oh, in the beginning, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was like so much material coming up because it could be held, because the soul of our relationship was so strong. But like, yeah, in the beginning, it's hard. It's hard to challenge all of those, the ego's belief systems, everything that's been adopted based off of the conditioning you based it in, based off of the relationship you witnessed and were modeled growing up that lives in your nervous system that just unconsciously wants to drive the ship, to shift all of that and to move towards, like in the beginning, how I find it is like your body's going to tell you a story that your partner is the biggest threat of your life, and you
Mhm.
still are going to move towards and connect with them. That's the part that's hard in the beginning of like the mind is finding all the evidence, leaving the prefrontal cortex and gathering all the evidence of why we shouldn't move towards connecting to our partner or taking responsibility or wanting to hold space emotionally. And then it's still moving towards to co-regulate. Like, hey, not the time to process, but let's just co-regulate and breathe together on the couch. At the beginning of it, a lot of it is that. Like, let's just feel safe while this is here and learn how to move towards when this is happening
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
practice that. And then what I imagine is after 22 years of it, then you do get to a place where it is easeful and enjoyable and the systems are there. The consistency is there, the reliability on that other person, that nervous system where someone is loving you that deeply, where it's like, I'm gonna keep being here. I care about you, want to get to know you. Like and let into those parts that are vulnerable and scary because I think that's a part too of like, well, I'm not going to open up in here. I'll get hurt again. Like
Yeah.
talk about the ultimate vulnerability.
It's true.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share my piece for a second on this because I agree with Alicia. Once you have the roadmap, it's like, okay, I get how to do this. Like I get how to do relationships. I notice in my relationship when it starts to get tough, it's when there's the external kind of thirds in life, like there's a job loss, there's COVID, there's a death of a family member. There's like these things where it's like it shakes up your soul's whole representation of like, hey, what is happening here? Your whole world changes. That those are the times where it gets, the bumps really start to happen. That's what we've noticed is those are the times when we come together. And I always say, like, I would never want to do the hard stuff with anybody else but him. Like, I love doing
Yeah.
hard with him. Easy is awesome. I mean, that's wicked. I'd love more easy, but there's times in life, there's seasons in life where it gets really challenging. And then it's like, hey, we have to work a little bit harder at making sure that we're maintaining this because it's like we're in a storm. And so it's like, hey, how do we hunker down in this storm to make sure that we're in this and we're staying really tight because the shit that's going on around us is pretty heavy and we got to make sure we really have each other's back.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I resonate with that so much. And I'm curious about that. Do you find when there's that external environment that just brings up those deeper layers, like in between the connection, that it's almost like like, yeah, the triggers are what's happening on the outside, but really it's just drawing up like, whoa, okay, new ingredients, bringing up those deeper, more tender layers that just haven't been touched yet.
Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely speaking to like the biggest one for me was my dad passing away a year ago. And that you can't prepare for that. Like when that's somebody
Mhm.
who's so, I would say like I didn't know that part of myself until I lost him because I didn't have a
Mhm.
part that missed him until he was gone. So
Oh,
for sure it brings up, and I think I mean, grief is a whole other kind of, area of you're always moving through grieving that and growing together and lots of heavy, like deep conversations that just keep flowing. I know for my husband's lost a couple family members. So, I mean, we can sit and talk and cry and talk and cry. And it's like,
no.
this isn't easy. Like, it's lovely
Yeah.
and it feels so connecting, but it's like, oh, it's like, I just want it to
Yeah.
be easy for a little while again, Like, you're like, I just want to, like, I don't know, let's just go to the lake and make it easy again. And we do. Obviously, you step outside of
Yeah.
that, but just the reality, I think I have a client right now who's 73 and she's so lovely. And I gave her this IFS book to read. I said, read this, no bad parts. And she messaged me before the second session and said, I almost canceled because this was not a good book choice for me. And so, but I thought you were really credible and I loved our first session. So I'm going to give you another chance. And then she came to the next session and she had read the book and she's like, okay, you can change the notes in your notebook. That's my Bible. And I am totally, she's like, I thought that we had to figure it out by the time you're in your 70s. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
you have more life experience than I do, but my experience is that it is a journey and you'll keep uncovering more and more
Yeah.
and past lives maybe and all kinds of stuff. But
Yeah. I love that you shared that and talk about the most humbling experience to be at that phase of life and like, wow, like beautiful for intuitively offering that resource for her to accept that peace that life is inviting of like, and
Mhm.
there's still lots to experience and learn and be humbled by. Because I find I like repeatedly, I feel like I finally it's landed deep enough where I'm like, yep, just when I think I've got things figured out, life's gonna give me my next lesson and I can't wait for it. I'm gonna be brought down to my knees and I'm just gonna take in whatever learning is from that place because there is no ending to this onion. And the way I make sense of that is the more resourced we are as a human being, we're going to digest the collective trauma. And so whatever energy that's in the field that could use a resourced vessel to start to work through, I really believe that the energy will follow that. And it'll like, our ancestors and how it all gets mirrored is like, oh, what happened to like great, great, great grandpa? And like, imagine the world that they were living in. That's all living in our DNA. It's
Yeah.
been proven that we carry 14 generations of information in our DNA. 14 generations is living inside this one individual human experience. Anyone that thinks that the work stops is delusional
And let me
or
think of
really numb and frozen in their nervous system and
that true.
reach out to Dayna and we should work with
Collective
And
trauma,
Mike.
right? The collective
that.
trauma and the collective juiciness.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
they're both there. Like I don't want to just focus on traumas for sure, but we are resourced to deal with that trauma because we're collectively in that juiciness too, the pleasure of life, of nature, of the energy that exists. So they're both potent.
yeah, well, it's like, God, they're not separate. Like, if we really go down to the nitty gritty, they are not separate entities. The gold and the gems are in the root of the trauma. When I look at, God, do you think in my right mind I would choose a life where I'm adopted twice in the first year of my life and like learn from that vantage point? I would be insane to choose that. But when I actually have the lived experience in this human body of what that's unlocked inside of me, what that's pushed me towards out of necessity, that's where all of my greatest gifts live and reside in is in the level of pain and tumultuous terror, like the amount of nightmares that I've had to experience in this life based off of what's living in my genetics. Like, yeah, it's not the most enjoyable all the time, but it's also what helps me relate. And I'm curious in both of your experiences, what I find is it actually makes it easier to be relatable.
Oh, for
Like when
sure.
someone is sharing something that's vulnerable and scary inside, it's like, oh man, I'm going to get my lawn chair. Let's hang out here. I want to get to know what's in here. I'm not scared. Like, I'm not going to run away from this. I want to get to know what's in here. And like, yeah, it's scary. Thank God we're both here together. Like,
Yeah.
the juice, like, and then what comes from that, like, that's really like when I look at people step into their power, it's like people really accepting those deeper, more vulnerable parts of themselves that, guess what, come from trauma. Like
Mhm.
Richard Rudd, the guy who channeled the Gene Keys, talks about it in this way. Collectively, currently, where we're at is 98% of our DNA is junk DNA. It's traumatized. And so that leaves 2% collectively of perfectly healthy embodied enlightenment. So guess what? Somehow in that understanding, like all of what I am trying, I'll speak for myself, what I'm trying to achieve and liberate within myself is all facing that portal of trauma. Like my gifts are in there. I don't want to run from it or try to separate that part of myself. I want to bring in the amount of connections that are needed to help hold the scariness of that part that lives inside of me so that whatever, once it's held, I get to bring that to more of my experience of like, whoa, that'll be cool. Like if someone can hold me in that place, then who will I be? What more will I have to offer? Not because I have to in order to receive love, but whoa, cool, more to give.
Yeah. Well, that little
Mhm.
guy, the little dude you talked to earlier, right? That little dude who's so grieving love to the point of rage.
Mm,
That's potent. Like unleash.
totally. Yeah. And you know what created the most dysfunction is me trying to get rid of those parts of myself. Like
Yeah.
that's what led me to like just horrible choices. I can't get rid of it. And this is what and I'm sure you do with your clients as well, is like where that belief can come in is like, I just need to get rid of this part. I don't want to look at that part. I need to get rid of it. I need to get rid of this part, how it shows up in relationship. We just need to get rid of that. No, you need to bring that in closer and figure out what it needs to really love it.
Yeah. And
It's
validate that.
inviting. Oh,
Yeah. It is.
yeah.
And I was going to speak to that earlier, just even when ourself or when our partners are going through something to even just speak from that, like, well, like you said, with you and Kevin, where it's like, oh, there's a part of me that is just like I'm spiraling right now. I'm feeling, anxious. Like, and then just being like, hey, it's okay. I can like let's tune into that. Like let's be with that together. Where do you feel that in your body? And just
Yeah.
just validate that in your partner. And when I notice it in my husband, sometimes I'll even say like, oh, like I notice this like little 14-year-old part of you right now that's really pissed off. I'm like, it's okay to be a little bit
Yeah.
pissed off, and just be like, I can just like meet him there and just be like, and I know that that's the part that's coming up. It's not his adult version self. It's like, oh, I get to like be with that part now. It's kind of fun. Relationships are fun that way. We're multiple, right? I mean, you're like, who are you? I don't know. Today, right now, we'll see.
Yeah. I find that
Be
so I
playful.
find that so I find that so healing just hearing you share that. I can feel the 14-year-old me. I'm like, oh, I can kind of push against you a little bit. I can be here too. Courtney will do that. I feel like yeah, Courtney will do that too. Sometimes she'll just reflect of like, oh, I can really feel that little guy that just didn't get to have his no with his mom and push away. And like, yeah, he's welcome. Like I can feel that. And I'm like, oh, part of me will feel embarrassed or like sometimes I'll like no. And like, oh yeah, yeah, totally. Yep. This is where I'm at. I'm evolving through this part. I'm at the part where I'm like needing to practice my no. And oh, and then she's still there. Because that's what that little guy, that 14-year-old need is like, mom, but are you still there? Like, I'm kind of mad at you and like, fuck you, but can I still come in for a hug? Are you still gonna you still gonna love me or are you mad at me and gonna like kick me out of the house now? Like
Yeah, so true.
love that.
I want to circle back, not today, but I want to get you back on and talk about that, the keys, whatever they're called, those first keys.
Totally.
We're gonna do that for sure. After this podcast, I'm gonna go on and try to figure out my birth time and all the things. But how do people find you? If they want to connect with you after this podcast, how do people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is on Instagram, handles at Mike Elliot, ELLIOTT 808. Or you can go to itsmikeelliot.com. But Instagram's the easiest way.
Perfect.
Or
Well,
you can go, another way to kind of tap into our material is you can just search together on all the podcast platforms and tune into the Together podcast. And then another podcast I have is called Menamorphosis. So you can search those two.
amazing. Amazing.
Amazing.
Thank you for a
Aw.
gift to this world.
Yeah,
Mm.
so thankful that you came on, Mike, and we're going to have you and Courtney on, so people will get to experience the two of you together, which is going to be so amazing. I'm excited.
Fun.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me on. This is so nourishing for my heart and soul to feel you both, to have this conversation, to talk about relationship, to be seen and heard and felt in my story that I shared. And I'm really looking forward for Courtney and I coming in here too. Like, oh, we get to talk about relationship in our relationship. Yes. More of that.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We're really glad you're here with us on this journey.
The best way to support this podcast is to subscribe and give it a 5-star review.
See you next time.
This has been a Bread Dog Studios production.